Welcome to my 22nd show of the year on the 22nd of the 2nd, 22. A good omen, we might hope. But the present day is deeply worrying when it comes to global affairs. The long-anticipated and scarcely dissuaded move by Russia into eastern Ukraine is terrifying, of course, for the people of Ukraine and problematic for not only peace and stability in Europe, but the power balance globally between democracies and authoritarian regimes, between the West and the East, between freedom and totalitarianism. You see, we all want peace, of course, but unless you're prepared to take a stand somewhere, the bullies and brute force will always prevail. It's one of the reasons, though certainly not the only one, but it's one of the reasons that the West might have drawn a line at Ukraine, the way we've drawn a line across the Taiwan Straits or the 38th parallel on the Korean Peninsula. As of this moment, the line between freedom and self-determination in Europe and Russian ultra-nationalism and authoritarianism has just crept further west. Russian domination and brutality has expanded, liberty has retreated. None of this is to oversimplify what's happened. This is a long-standing tension that's deeply rooted in history, and the eastern parts of Ukraine have experienced years of fighting between Russian sympathisers and Ukrainian nationalists. How could we forget that in this country after 27 Australians were killed just 6 years ago when a missile shot by pro-Russian rebels shot down Malaysian Airlines flight MH17. That was 8 years ago, actually, but with Vladimir Putin effectively annexing this part of Ukraine now, sending in what he laughingly calls peacekeepers, a full invasion of the former Soviet Republic of Ukraine might not be far off. The European powers, NATO, the US, none of them have done much to warn off the Russians. They've effectively treated the invasion as a fait accompli. And if you want to see the epitome of impotence in global affairs, just have a look at the United Nations Security Council holding urgent sessions to try to push back at Russia. A forum, of course, where Russia is a permanent member wielding a veto power. In fact, Russia actually chaired this meeting. So sure, Russia is going to pass a resolution condemning Russia, is it? Really? Forget the UN. It's the nation states that have to stand up. The strong must stand up for the weak, or else anarchy prevails. All we hear now is words, little about consequences.
This move by President Putin is clearly the basis for Russia's attempt to create a pretext for a further invasion of Ukraine. The consequences of this action will be felt far beyond Ukraine's borders.
Russia should step back. It should unconditionally withdraw back behind its own borders and stop threatening its neighbours. It's unacceptable, it's unprovoked, it's unwarranted. And Russia should understand that by seeking to invade another country, that this cannot advantage them and it would seriously and significantly cost Russia and their international reputation.
Now, Putin is a menace. He's long been a menace to democracy, a menace to his own people, a menace to Europe, and of course a menace to the global order. I heard him speak at the annual Munich Security Conference way back in 2007. It was a seminal speech, dramatic at the time, but it's become even more important in hindsight. He railed then against the West and the idea of a world dominated by only one superpower, the US. But he also railed against the established international order. It seemed unhinged at the time and created quite a diplomatic storm. Yet more than a decade on, we know that that was the real Putin, the ultra-nationalist leader for life, intent on rebuilding a Russian empire.
I would like to reiterate that Ukraine to us is not just a neighbouring country. It is part and parcel of our history, culture, our soul, our atmosphere and space. It's our comrades, our people, not just colleagues or friends, but relatives, people tied to us with blood ties, family ties.
Remember, in the wake of that MH17 atrocity, Tony Abbott vowed to shirt-front Putin, and the usual media and leftist fools in this country saw fit to criticise and mock Abbott rather than Putin. How puerile they are. Well, the former Prime Minister has delivered a speech in Hungary overnight and put the current global situation, the precarious point we're at now, into typically clear focus. He said this is a crucial moment with America in retreat and the possibility of a new Iron Curtain descending in Europe. Perhaps this military crisis might awaken the people of Western countries, so recently discombobulated by a virus and so unaccustomed to sacrifice, to how readily a freedom that's not cherished and defended can be lost, Abbott said. He spoke about how little Western countries had put on the line for Ukraine and said, "We who shrink from war because it's morally wrong have to make others shrink from war because they'd likely lose." Yep, the disincentives put in the way of Putin have been minimal. Some stern words, the threat of economic sanctions, but zero threat of military consequences. It's as though the West has given up on the foundation principles of democracy, sovereign rights, and a rules-based international order, not to mention the primacy of the nation state. And Abbott also spoke about how Russia and China are taking advantage of this weakness, which is not just a military reticence, but a cultural malaise. Meanwhile, said Abbott, comrades Putin and Xi watch the scuttle from Kabul because a long-term military presence was judged to be too hard, the toppling of statues because yesterday's heroes have to be damned by today's standards, and our self-flagellation over race and identity, even though there's never been less racism and minorities have never had a fairer go. And they conclude a decadent West is unlikely to defend itself with vigour, let alone stand up for others. Yeah, Tony Abbott there is tragically correct. Western nations won't even trumpet their culture, their history and their values to their own school children. We don't even defend our values and our culture against attacks from the activists in the universities or the media. So how can we be expected to stand up for it against an armed aggressor threatening an emerging democracy? Yes, Ukraine matters, certainly for the Ukrainians, a country of 40 million people with superb agricultural produce, sophisticated manufacturing, plentiful mineral resources and, of course, a proud history. It could soon become a war zone or perhaps just another Russian province. But Ukraine matters for all of us too, because it begs the question about where Western liberal democracies will actually draw the line for freedom. And if Ukraine falls to Russia, it'll leave the world less stable, less free, and more perilous.